everyone. My name is Avital. Welcome to the Altneu Synagogue. We started here about a year ago. I'm a co-founder along with my husband, Rabbi Benjamin Goldschmidt. And it is a great honor and privilege, first and foremost, to host Kelsey and Stephanie for this conversation tonight, and all of you here together for this literary evening. We're hoping, with God's help, to have more of these evenings here. So if you have any ideas, any thoughts of future events, we're very much all ears. I just want to say that Kelsey, I think everyone in this room knows who Kelsey is. And I just want to say on a personal note that I've known Kelsey for about 10 years now, actually. And we met, I think, the first time, do you remember? In the lobby of the Plaza Hotel, as one does. For a cup of coffee. We decided we were very important writers, so we needed to sit for a tea at the Plaza Hotel. And since then, we've had a very special friendship, and I'm so grateful to you for your friendship, and it's an honor to be able to host this party, this event, the celebration of this book that I think is so essential and so timely for this moment, in exploring the role of religion today in modernity. And with you in conversation will be Stephanie BUTNICK, whose voice you will probably recognize from the Unorthodox podcast host, writer, editor, who recently launched the newsletter Golda Guide. Go check it out on Instagram. And it's all about Jewish lifestyle. So with no further ado, I hand the microphone over to you.
Thank you, Avital. Thank you. I assume every time I come here, people will be as dressed up as they were for the gala, which is not the case tonight, but I will let that slide. But you know, it's really wonderful to be here and to be here with Kelsey. We actually met when your first book. We're all just talking about when we met Kelsey. We'll go around at the end and share all the good college stories. But we met when your first book came out, and it's been feels really special to be back here for your second book, which is, as Avital said, such an important book for this moment. And this story, so we're going to talk for a little bit, and then we're going to open to the audience because I'm sure you have a lot of questions. And then, of course, Kelsey will be signing all the books that you buy. So we'll be doing that right after. This story really starts with Kelsey and her journey, as so many great works of art and literature do. So I would really like it if you could start us off with, you know, a little short reading, a taste of what we get in Godstruck.
Sure. Okay. So I'm reading from towards the end. This is a little bit of a portion that tells a little bit about the beginning of my story, but also talks a bit about sort of Orthodox dress to tie in that theme. Okay. So in the early 2010s, I was spending more time in Jewish settings and flirting with the idea of conversion, though I hadn't chosen a denomination yet. I assumed that between my family, my Reform-raised boyfriend, and my own lack of knowledge, becoming Orthodox would be impossible, even though I found myself most drawn to Orthodox life and practice. The crux of this attraction was that, like Christina and the Amish, that's an earlier subject, I admired that their theology and their lifestyles aligned. It bothered me that in the face of something Jewish that didn't jive with modern sensibilities, many liberal leaders seem to always and automatically cast the Jewish stuff aside in favor of modernity in a way that struck me as lacking in reflection and kowtowing to presentism. The conversion processes of the less observant movements, which I initially looked into, had all the spiritual sustenance of being a product on a conveyor belt. In one particularly disastrous meeting, a liberal rabbi sadly smiled at me and informed me I wouldn't be able to have a Christmas tree again. I was insulted that he would have thought I'd assumed I could, and trumpeted his own open-mindedness before cautioning me to stay away from Orthodox people because they would never accept me as a Jew. I knew he was possibly right about this. I was just irritated because he assumed that I didn't understand the nuances involved. When he followed up with me by email, I simply deleted the message and figured that this debacle confirmed that I wanted to convert Orthodox or not at all, which probably meant I just remain an unfulfilled Philo-Semite forever. But while I felt that I probably would never be Orthodox, I could console myself by sneaking into various Orthodox spaces. I'd recently begun to publish work in various online outlets And I found that saying I was working on a story was a ticket into almost any environment, no matter how closed it seemed from the outside. One day, when I was 27 years old, I was flipping through New York Magazine at my day job when I came across a very brief mention of a story out of Borough Park, Brooklyn. A group of women in this heavily Hasidic neighborhood were starting their own ambulance service, which would rival the robust and established Hatzalah EMT service, staffed only by men. I immediately knew I had to cover the story, so I tracked down the woman spearheading the project, a lawyer and mother of 6 named Ruchi Fryer, who agreed to meet me in Brooklyn one afternoon. Fryer's fame has grown since we met. The EMT service was later the subject of a documentary film called 93 Queen that streams on HBO. If you look closely, you'll see me looking slightly amused and out of place in an early scene. In 2016, she was elected civil court judge in Brooklyn, becoming the first Hasidic female elected official in the country. Fortunately for me, my boss was out of town, so I slipped out early, rode the Q train for 30 minutes, and emerged from the depths of the subway system into a small foreign country in the middle of New York City. Men in black hats and long black coats on a balmy July day, women in short wigs pushing baby carriages determinedly down city sidewalks, and storefronts lined with silver candelabras and volumes upon volumes of religious writings in dense, arcane-looking script. In Fryer's office, she and I spoke for a while about her involvement with the new EMT service, the way that Hatzalah had, under the guise of modesty, in Yiddish sneas, or in Hebrew sneut, which often refers to modest clothing, but can also imply dignified conduct, excluded women from joining, and about her views on feminism. Feminist is a bad word in my community. I don't want to be a rabbi, but I think outside religious obligations, I should be able to do whatever a man can do, she said, which sounded a lot like feminism to me. I told her I was considering converting to Judaism, though I didn't mention that I was still unsure how I would accomplish this. Before I got up to leave, she had one more thing to say. The women in her organization would probably be more inclined to speak with me if I dressed modestly, she said. I knew what this meant, elbows, knees, and collarbone covered. It didn't sound exactly like a rebuke, but I had to stop my hand from instinctively reaching up to cover a triangle of my bare chest. More than 10 years later, I still remember exactly what I was wearing that day, a navy J. Crew dress with a wide V-neck and short sleeves with decorative circular holes in the upper arms and shoulders, revealing pockets of skin. Tasteful, yes. Modest by Hasidic standards, no. I've told that story often since then, and each time I've noted that plenty of other women reporters would likely have been offended by her request and perhaps just refused to comply. But I was excited. I immediately began rifling through my wardrobe to find anything long-sleeved and knee-length. I had very little of the latter. I got a friend who grew up not far away from Borough Park to accompany me on a trip to Junie, a From Women's store that catered mostly to tweens and teens, where I bought a knee-length dark gray skirt fit for a Hasidic high schooler, and a shell, the name for the supremely uncomfortable, tight, polyester spandex blend shirts that women I'm sorry, they were very uncomfortable. That women often threw under short sleeve shirts or tank tops to make the sinful miraculously modest. When I'd go south from my apartment in hip brownstone Brooklyn to attend a meeting of EMTs, I'd dip into the modest section of my closet, pick out the evening's garment, and jump on the subway in my best Hasidic LARPing gear. While I never felt like I truly blended in, Hasidic women always looked polished and largely monochromatic, while I retained the odd piece of Olsen twin-inspired dumpster chic flair, my blonde hair always slightly mangy. I must have done a decently good job, because the EMTs regularly mistook me for one of them. "Oh, look at you, you're so good saying your Tehillim," a young woman gushed over me one evening, upon finding me hunched over a tiny notebook. I was too embarrassed to tell her it was my notes for the piece, not a little book of Psalms, and that I was prying, not praying. You think that's enough, or should I keep going? Okay, all right, well, we're gonna stop there.
Now I want to buy that book. So, such a good writer. So you write something early on. You write, but years into a wild and woolly urban 20s experience, I found myself drawn to a Judaism that was mystical, conservative, and rigorous. And so, in direct contrast to most of my peers and to the statistical trends that show Americans, and in particular young Americans, rapidly secularizing, I pursued it. So let's get into sort of the data around this. It feels like a few years ago we were seeing all these articles like, people hate religion, the young people are turning away, this sort of crisis of like the nuns that we were, N-O-N-E-S. Not to be confused with the nuns who also appear in this book in one of the chapters, but now it does feel like we're seeing a lot more of the like young people seeking religion headlines. Could you walk us through sort of these broader trends we're seeing with regards to secularism, the pull towards religion, particularly among, again, like young Americans?
Sure. So you're right. When I converted, and for many years before that, I think sociologists sort of really can pinpoint it in the 90s when the percentage of Americans who identified as being religious really started to plummet. And that looked like it was going to continue fairly unabated and was fairly, I would say, underanalyzed. I mean, maybe analyzed in a certain way, but was broadly seemed to be thought of as being a good thing. Nobody was like, oh no, it's such a shame. Maybe, did this go off? Hello? Sorry.
Okay.
Hello? Oh no, we're gone again. Maybe religious people thought it was a bad thing, but it didn't seem that in the, cultural, in the dominant culture that anybody was really, let's switch, that anybody was terribly worried about this. So we have seen, it's a weird moment for the book to come out actually, because I wasn't really writing it to make the argument that this was like poised for a resurgence. But then we have seen some data recently that indicates that maybe it is. Now, I'm saying that in a hedgy way because it's early, and you'll see these kinds of upticks or these little moments where I cite some of them in the book. There will be studies here and there that say, oh, actually, young Catholic women really do want to become nuns, or, And I think a lot of the time, what those things are measuring is really interest as opposed to people actually converting or becoming religious. So there was this recent Pew study that shows that the decline of Christianity seems to have plateaued. But I think it's early days to really say, oh, actually, everybody's about to become Christian again or whatever. And I think, you can't really ignore the elephant in the room of the political aspect of this, the way that our politics right now seems to be really aligned with a certain vision of Christianity, and not to say that people are saying that they're Christian in order to identify themselves politically, but there is maybe some sort of enmeshment there that's happening. So I think it's kind of early days to say whether actually religion is coming back. I will say that now that we've had a number of years of secularization, you do see in the mainstream press from non-religious writers a more sort of open-minded conversation about, okay, well, we said this was a good thing, but actually maybe did we miss something? Like, did we lose something in this process? So I'm thinking a lot about so many conversations about loneliness and social disconnection. And a lot of the time there's real awareness about, well, who's less lonely? Statistically speaking, it's people who are religious. They tend to fall better in a lot of categories in terms of happiness. It's even thought to be protective of certain diseases later in life. And so there is a kind of reckoning happening with what that means to have lost something that it turns out actually maybe might have had some good parts along with hard parts.
So I want to read the,
you want to switch on?
So this book is called Godstruck, 7 Women's Unexpected Journeys to Religious Conversion. I want to pick out one word, women's. So let's narrow this down even more. Could you tell us a little bit about why you were drawn to women's stories and what these women tell us about these broader trends when we do, shine a light on them?
Every time I take the mic, I'm like, it's going to work now. So why women? I think the biggest reason was that, I think I say in the introduction, like, for better or worse, I'm not very good writing-wise at examining, like, big trends. I tend to be more interested in why are the people who are going in the opposite direction of whatever that big trend it is, what are they doing and why are they doing it? So that was part of the reason. So that's why it's sort of interesting to be in this moment where now everyone thinks it's trendy, where I really pitched it as like an anti-trend thing. But and women in particular, because I was looking at people who joined, not entirely, but mostly traditional religious faiths. So I think the knee-jerk assumption there is that a woman doing that is going to have a harder time or more to lose. Traditional religious faiths, again, not everybody in the book, but most of the people in the book, are becoming part of communities where they're either implicitly or explicitly going to be encouraged to have bigger families, to have a more demanding domestic life, and to take a back seat in some cases in terms of the leadership in their faith or participation in their faith sometimes because of their sex. So, and yet, in terms of the data, we know that women tend to convert more than men do, and women tend to, they up until recently, and now it hasn't flipped, but the gap has narrowed a little bit. But generally speaking, women tend to be more active in their religious communities or express more religious sentiment. So there's tension there. I thought that was an interesting tension. Why would a majority of people who do something that looks like it's going to make their lives worse in some respects? I mean, I don't think it does, but that's the point I'm trying to make. It's a paradox. It looks like it shouldn't be that way, and yet it is. So why is that? Oh, yeah.
So I want to dig into a few of these stories. Again, you'll have to buy the book to get the rest, but they all sort of illustrate a point. And I want to start with Christina, who represents this dream of like throwing our phones away and moving to like quite literally Amish country, which is
right.
what she does. So tell us a little bit about Christina.
Okay. So she lives in a rural part of Maryland, where there's a small Amish community. The Amish, like Orthodox Jews, they're very geographically concentrated. They tend to live in the same places, and that's by design. They want it that way. So she moved as a child with her mom. Her parents divorced, and she moved to this small town in rural Maryland where there's a little Amish community, and she became sort of interested in her neighbors. They look different. They did different things. Who are these people? And I think that spark, she just had this spark of interest that drove her to want to learn more. And then eventually she decided in high school that was the life that she wanted to pursue. She wanted to become Amish. This is not a normal thing. I mean, you probably already know that, but it's a very complicated religion to convert to because they don't really have pathways to do this. Even I mean, it's complicated to convert to Orthodox Judaism, but you go to a rabbi and they know what steps you need to go through and what path. In the Amish world, they really don't. It's a very rare thing. But she happened to be in this place where there was a guy who was maybe in his 60s who converted as a young person. So the community was fairly welcoming to her. She was baptized into the church right when she graduated from high school. And yeah, I think she has a very interesting relationship with a lot of, I mean, if you want to put it under the heading of modernity or technology, it doesn't feel to me as an outsider, knowing her and knowing her life, it didn't feel to me that she had to think so much about rejecting it the way that we might, the way that a person that we know might have to be like, I'm taking 30 days off of Instagram or whatever. It's much more it's much more easy, it's easier for her than that. And I think part of that is because these are the community norms that she lives with. She doesn't have to make these decisions alone and then explain to everybody, here's why I don't own a car or whatever. And the other part is that there's just an interesting thing that happens when, you know, I don't think she sees her posture as defensive. I don't think the Amish feel that way. I think they're able to kind of take what they need and leave what they think is going to be problematic or corrosive to their community. And they do it in a way that really works. And that's interesting because we don't do that. You know, I think a lot in most parts of our society, we just kind of barrel ahead with whatever is new and is there. And then only after we have it and we think it's impossible to give up, are we then like, no, I hate this thing. Get rid of it from me. Get it away from me, you know? So, yeah.
I do want to point out that Kelsey is not on social media. So all of this commentary comes from someone who has never like doom scrolled on
No, I
Instagram.
definitely have doom scrolled, just not on
Instagram. But you know, it's interesting because when you're describing the Amish, it's like, yes, there's a religious conversion, but there's also sort of a lifestyle conversion, right? This idea of the agrarian appeal, this working with your hands, being outside, and like the social work of like a knitting circle or a barn raising, which I don't quite know what that is, but I assume you saw something like that. But so tell us a little bit about this idea of these women were not just going into specific faiths, they're also in many ways were going into like ways of life that go beyond religion.
So again, not for everyone, but certainly for her and for other subjects in the book, they're becoming religious can come with a very high cultural barrier in terms of understanding the way that you dress, for example, the way that you speak, the activities that are sanctioned or approved of or encouraged by your community. So the examples that you gave, the barn raising, we'll have that discussion at a different time. But you know, I think the Amish, they didn't. I'm not a historian, but I would say if you can say very broadly, I think we sort of move towards valuing a knowledge class, people who, or at least socially, there's a prestige to having a job where you're working with the computer mostly, and maybe jobs that involve manual labor are sort of a little lower in terms of what you assume somebody is in terms of their class or whatever. So the Amish didn't really ever do that. You know, part of that is the decisions that they made about things like valuing farming. A lot of people assume that that's because they're ecologically minded. And it's not that they're not ecologically minded, but they were smart about this lifestyle is conducive to a family being all together and to have a groundedness in the world, right? To do things like knit and can food and farm. That's part of that being attached to each other and to the things of the world. And I think if I can be corny for a second, I think that's a lot of people miss that. Even if we've never always experienced that, I think something about our modern lives, like that's why we watch these things that's why we watch duck farmers on YouTube, which is a thing and it's very cute and I'm not denying that, but I think that part of that longing is because we lost that or whatever of it we had before.
I want to talk a little bit about Hannah, who is also in the book, and she talks, you know, she shows us that there are not just religion conversions, there's like culturally specific ones. So could you tell us, she basically wanted to be like a Saudi Muslim. That's like where she ends up, which is both a religious faith and also a very, very, very specific regional subset that she didn't, you know, initially belong to. So tell us a little bit about that journey and sort of what that says in the broader book.
Right. Yeah. So Hannah,
By the way, I made her Jewish. I called her Hannah.
No, it's okay.
I'm sorry.
Well, her name is spelled in such. It's fair. It's a fair mistake. Hannah converted in college, and there are many Muslims in the world. There are many different ways to be Muslim, and like the Amish and Jews, there are these strong ethnic components, and it's not, there are different subcultures within Islam. So if you're a convert and you don't have one, then more or less you kind of have to choose one. And for her, it just so happened that the people that she became closest with were Saudi, and this was the culture that she was, this cultural expression of Islam, which to many Americans is kind of a mind-boggling thing to do, because it's, by many metrics, the strictest. Saudi Arabia, up until really recently, was this kind of closed, or we thought of it as really this closed environment, that you couldn't go there, or maybe it wasn't safe. And so it's this really pretty radical and surprising thing for her to do, and yet in some ways it's sort of emblematic of what a lot of people have to do when they convert. It's less a Christian thing, although you do see it in the Amish sector. So for those who haven't read it, she ended up actually moving. She relocated to Saudi Arabia in 2015 in her 20s as a single woman, which at the time was just not, and even now, like, it's probably just not really that commonly done, especially if you're not moving for a job or because you got married to someone. And she lives there now.
It is interesting because, like when you convert to Judaism, it's like you're not becoming like a Yemeni Jew, right? Or like an Ashkenazi Jew. I mean, you sort of, in some ways, you are creating your own universe. And we do that denominationally here, right? That's the easiest way to organize it. But I guess I'm curious for you if that, like you saw that story, you saw Hannah doing that, and you were like, I sort of understand that conundrum of trying to figure out like where you fit in.
Oh, I completely understand that. Of course. I think that, I think by default, I'm married to an Ashkenazi Jew, and so I think by default, I think of myself as Ashkenazi, and also my actual lineage is mostly from England, so I think it makes the most sense. But there are so many ways in which I feel that I don't know how to say this in like a less provocative way, but there are times where I feel that I'm inhabiting a culture that is not mine. I mean, it is mine because it's my theology, but there's so much of the way that I say words that, when we're talking, when I'm talking to my friends and community members about holidays or whatever, and you're sprinkling Hebrew words in, and it feels natural, but on the other hand, and this is also part of my personality, is just being a person who's sort of always living my life and like watching my life happen at the same time, where I'm
called being a writer.
Yes, I think that is what it is. I hope that's what it is, otherwise we're in real trouble. Where I feel like I don't even know, I know what I'm saying, but like, I'm pronouncing it. I feel like I'm embodying something that sometimes on my good days, I'm embodying this thing because I love it. And sometimes I'm like, do I deserve this? Am I doing something wrong? I mean, there's a lot of disconnect there, or discomfort that comes up every once in a while. I don't know if that's something that other converts feel, or if it's really just like me and my thing, me and the observance thing. But I really do understand it with Hannah. And I don't know that I understand that I can relate so clearly to really zeroing in on, and I've met Jews who've converted and really then, thought, or like chose to become part of a Sephardi community. I don't know that I understand Hannah's, like, this is what I want. It's so specific, and I'm going to wear the clothes, and I'm going to think of myself that way. That part, I don't know that I get, but I understand the confusion of being like, well, I don't have any of this stuff, so I guess I have to figure that out,
We're in this really interesting moment where we all talk about, or we hear talk about, like, wellness and self-care and finding, like, a lot of these things that are available to us are like these very modern products that are essentially like sold to us as a way to like disconnect and unplug. And you're sort of making the case here that there's actually something like much more foundational available to people. Instead of like apps that tell you to get off other apps, there's like whole worldviews that allow you to sort of do this in a much more natural way. So can you tell us a little bit about how like religion is actually, you know, sort of like the OG of ways to sort of get it back in touch, and the way we're sort of getting confused on that now, right? We have all these other options. So like, what is religion giving us that like candlelit Pilates or breath work isn't, basically? Not to scandalize everyone, but.
What's the scandalizing part? That there is breath
Well, then I would
work,
ask
or that
that question.
or that you're saying breath work might be bunk?
I would never say that.
Okay, so there's a quote in the book that from an American sociologist named Philip Reef, and I think about this quote all the time, and I'm paraphrasing. So, but he basically says, religion used to function as a mechanism of control of everyday life, and also as a respite from that very control. Right? So we all, being human beings in the world, we desire some control over our lives, but we can't always be thinking about that because it drives you crazy to do that. But I think the problem is that, to my mind, there really, when this triumphant, okay, religion is dying, religion is declining thing was happening, there were a lot of things that kind of popped up in its wake that were kind of like, maybe this will fill the void. There was atheist church for a while. Soul Cycle, people like to use that one as an example a lot because like you're moving, and I've never been to a Soul Cycle class, so I can't really say. I think you're in the dark and there might be candles and chanting maybe. But like all this stuff is supposed to do right. But I think the problem is it was still a mechanism of control. It didn't give the respite. It didn't give the other piece. And I've had people ask me recently, well, why? Why would those things not be enough? I had a reporter from the New York Times who was doing a thing about like modern belief, and she was like, I talked to Richard Dawkins, and he was like, why, you can just join a golf club, and like there are all these things that they should be enough. And I don't know that I have a good answer. Like, as a believer, I think, well, that's because God is bigger than these other things, and nothing else is that big. And I think when, you know, my feeling is that everything flows from that. But if you weren't a believer and you wanted to try to crack the puzzle, there are some other things that I think get towards why it helps in this wellness department. One is that I think a lot of religious structures really tick a lot of boxes in terms of taking care of the individual and understanding the individual in relation to a community, right? So think about like Vivek Murthy, the outgoing Surgeon General, whose big thing is wellness. And he had this whole report that he wrote about like how to be well. And a lot of it is like eat dinner with other people, like go outside, you know, these really, or like have a conversation with someone. And so like all of these things are good advice. But the problem is that if the individual as an individual, you have to be doing all of those things yourself. That's a long to-do list to just then figure out how to do all of those things piecemeal. But if you're part of a religious community, all of those things are kind of taken care of by virtue of being in that community. You know, like you're already gonna, I mean, now I'm speaking for my own community. This isn't true of everyone, but you're already regularly eating with other people. You're already, you know, being together in moments. There's already a script for what you do when someone is grieving. You don't have to make it all up. It's already there. I'm not saying that it works all the time in all places for everyone, but I think that it takes away the onus on the person to build those structures for themselves every time that they need something, you know? There was something else I was going to say, but I think I forgot what it was, so we'll go back to you.
So given this beautiful and learned setting, we're going to get to audience questions in a second. I just thought you should tell us all about the midrash with the gazelle and the cattle.
Oh, yeah.
Give us a little, you know, a little learning right now, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Okay.
Not to put you on the spot, but.
Okay, so I think Rachel was here. I don't know if she's still here, but she is the one who introduced me to this and translated it for me. And also she had said she had never seen it before, so you're welcome, Rachel. So there's this midrash that Rachel and I learned together, and the story goes something like this. The midrash can be sort of it's biblical commentary, but narrative, often narrative and poetic in nature, and sometimes a little inscrutable. It's very lovely things to study in there. So there's this king. The king is generally thought of as being a stand-in for God. So the king has lots of animals. He has sheep, he has cows, and he has a shepherd who watches over these things for him because he's a king, he doesn't have to do it himself. And one day, a gazelle wanders into this pen with the animals. And the king tells So then the shepherd is letting the animals out during the day to go graze. The gazelle goes out with the animals, and then at night comes back into the pen, closes the pen door. And this happens for a while, and the king tells the shepherd, watch the gazelle, take care of the gazelle for me. And he shows his family the gazelle. He's clearly taking a lot of pride in this animal. And the shepherd asks him, why? Why are you doing this? You know, I've watched your animals for a long time. I've never seen you react to the cows or the sheep this way. And the king says, the gazelle's normal way to be is to be out in the wilderness. This isn't the way that he's supposed to be, but as long as he's made this choice to come be here, and as long as he's here, we need to nurture him and take care of him especially. And this is an interesting thing that I think is worth unpacking sometime, Rachel and whoever else. He says, if it decides to go back out, we're not gonna stop it. But while it's here, we need to take extra care. And then the midrash ends by saying, the gazelle is like the ger, which is a term for convert, or biblically means usually stranger, but convert. And so what it's saying is that God is saying to take extra special care of the convert because it's this stranger in this flock, but there's something, special that's developed, there's this special consideration that needs to be taken for it. It's a very beautiful thing. That passage. Yeah. Okay.
So I would love to hear, Kelsey would love to hear all the questions. We're in a small room, so we probably don't need the microphone, but we'll repeat the question so that everyone hears it. Ooh, here, I'm going to do this. Oh. Wow. Yes.
Yeah.
I have a question that I want to ask without being rude, but do you feel like, it's not rude, but do you feel like people that you've found through interviewing them that convert have some kind of story? Like everyone has a story, but that they have something difficult that they had already gone through, or that kind of forced them to be more introspective, that forced them to explore. Like, did you find a common thread of some kind of earlier childhood experience or early adolescent experience?
So she said she doesn't want to be rude, but no, she wants to know if there was a common thread of sort of early childhood or earlier life adversity or something that maybe primed these women to be more introspective or thoughtful. The short answer is yes, I think some of them had challenging experiences early in life. Hannah lost her mom at a very young age, and her dad wasn't present, so she had a difficult family life. And I don't want to say it's representative necessarily. It's, there's only 7 people who are really in depth in the book. I'm not comfortable with pinning it on, they had some sort of trauma. And also there's one person who, maybe I would have to ask her if she calls it trauma, but to my mind, her life was actually pretty sort of stable, and I don't think, I would not call her.
I should have phrased it more like, did anyone just have have like a staple, whatever, and just got curious, yeah.
Yes, I would think that, first of all, I would think that even the people who had challenging experiences earlier in life, I would not call anybody that I spoke to unstable. And not even in a way that sounds pejorative. I don't even mean it in a pejorative way. I think they were all very functional members of society, and still are, to my knowledge. And I would say at least one person in particular, there's nothing I can point to. I think she was having a hard time in her life, but for reasons that were, if I can say it, like fairly quotidian. You know, she had broken up with her boyfriend, she was going to college, she was feeling a little bit lost, but not in a way that's, you know, out of the ordinary.
Whose story made the biggest impression on you?
Ooh. Oh gosh. That's really hard. I think that's a really hard answer because I really found all of them very, very interesting and moving in their own ways. I think that I've always been really drawn to Hannah's story because I think that the complexities that her story reveals are intellectually interesting to me. You know, this puzzle of what does it mean to take on a culture that isn't your culture? And we live in an age where, at least up until fairly recently, that was like not, outside of this context, that was not a thing you could do without risking some sort of social opprobrium. So I've always been very interested in her story and Christina's story, and she's just such a lovely person. And I think, you know, Angela's obviously a friend of mine from before the book. I think that experience of writing it was very interesting and special for me, not only because we know each other, but because it was its own sort of task to write about a transformation that happens largely inward, as opposed to other transitions which are much more noticeably behavioral and things like that. I don't know. I basically just said 50% of the people in it. Sorry, it's not really a great answer. Yes.
Hi. Everyone can hear me? Fabulous. This is an Ashkenaz space, and you're like, do we need a microphone? So you alluded to this earlier about the traditional gender norms within many of these communities, you know, especially a young woman going to Saudi Arabia where they still have the guardianship model and she cannot drive. So I was wondering if both with these women and in the people you interviewed, if you notice any themes regarding their level of desire for traditional gender roles for women, you know, being a mother, maybe perhaps having less responsibilities out of the home, and if you found people who were broadly exceptions to that rule, who were pursuing this religious life for like purely intellectual or spiritual purposes, while taking difficulty with the gender expectations for women.
Should I repeat that, or did everyone hear? She's asking, yeah, okay, cool, we got it. We're talking about gender norms and whether some of these women or other people were sort of actively pursuing more traditional gendered roles in their lives. So I would say that of these women, the answer is no. I don't think any of them, except for maybe one, really was going into it thinking that the traditional gender roles were part of the draw. It's a little hard to untangle because I think that, I mean, as I said in the afterword, so there are 7, if we're not counting me, when I met them, all 6 of them were unmarried. For Oriane, who's a nun, that's obviously irrelevant. And then since I finished writing about them, 2 of them ended up getting married. Now, whether they got married because they wanted traditional gender norms and that's why they became religious, or whether they just got married because that's what they were going to do anyway, I can't really say. But there is interesting hints of these days, outside of the people in the book and outside of conversion, there are hints of this idea that maybe when young people are flirting with becoming religious or are becoming religious, that they do have these more traditional gender roles in mind. There is some data to show that they, when they're attracted to those more predictable, sort of old school ideas. You know, and I think we see that a little bit in the trad wife thing. But I did not, I did not see that amongst these. And certainly, like Kate, the Mormon, who did get married, and she got married young, I would say, for somebody of her generation. So again, like, would she have gotten married that young had she not become a Latter-day Saint? I don't know, maybe not. It's not an unfair assumption to say maybe not, but.
Do you want to do one more question,
Yes.
Amanda?
Hi.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the process of writing the book. How did you meet some of these women? Did they open up to you immediately because you shared that common thread of having converted as well? And just talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So the process of writing the book was great. It was the best like 2 years of just being in a little bubble of, you know, interesting conversations and being able to sort of swim around in all these really great texts, and it was really fun. I had a nice time. I met them through wildly different means, depending on who they were. One person I met on Reddit. One person, you'll see, Hannah was on one episode of a reality TV show in 2015, and I remember I was watching it, and I was like, "Oh, this is interesting." And she had a blog, so I like tracked her down through her blog. One person I met because I cold emailed a bunch of churches in California, and they said, you know, here are 2 people who might fit what it is that you're looking for.
That would never work with a synagogue.
I think probably not, for
So Christian.
for good reason, perhaps. But yeah, I don't know how comfortable people would be with like somebody cold emailing synagogue and like, do you have any good Jews for me? Like, maybe not the best. Anyway, and I think that, you know, I do wonder about this because they're all converts, and obviously we're coming to the table with very different beliefs. We're not hanging out and talking about our mutual belief in, you know, in Jesus or the angel Moroni or whatever. But there was never any, I think there was a lot that we could relate to in one another, or at least I can speak for myself. I found a lot that I could relate to in them, and I felt that it was very easy to talk about our lives. There was a lot of overlap. And yeah, it was great. I had a great time. That's the process.
It's amazing. And on that note, thank you all. We want to do one more?
All right,
Okay, we'll do one more.
I guess interviewing these people and maybe other people that you spoke to for the book, the thing that attracted them first, or was the predominant attraction, was the community and the people and the lifestyle, or purely the religion?
That is a really good question. I'm just going through these people in my mind. I think for most of the people in the book, I would say that their primary draw was the religion. That's not everybody. I can think of one exception, maybe 2. Now, again, like people don't always have like one motivation, you know, so it might be a little muddier. But I will say that I think it's not uncommon to have the primary draw be the community or an individual or whatever. I have a friend who used to teach conversion classes, and said infrequently to Judaism, and she said infrequently people brought up God, very rarely, and that a lot more of it was about sort of lifestyle and ritual or whatever. And so maybe they're anomalous. Maybe these people are anomalous in that way. But the way a lot of them described it to me was there were moments, or there was, for Hannah, it was a text, a specific part of the Quran that she read. So a lot of them were drawn more by the religion. I don't know if that means that most people are, but they were. Yeah. Okay, I think that was our last one, right? Yeah.
Well, Kelsey Osgood, thank you so much. Altneu, thank you for having us here. Schmoozing and signing, right? Schmoozing and signing? Perfect. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, I gotta go over here.
Book is being sold outside. Signing is over here. So you go there and then here. I feel like I'm like an air traffic. I'm at Newark.
But we need those, though.
I know.
Apparently, there's not that many of them.
Happy lunch.
Thank you.
Yay.